Hello and welcome to the sixth and final part of Fundamentals of Hangar Development. This is another episode of War Robots Basics where I speak about principles of the game that may be especially interesting for newer players. In the first part we looked into a practical approach on how you can develop your War Robots Hangar from zero. In the second part we briefly looked into Silver Gear, and the third part covered Titans. The fourth part Motherships, and the fifth part was all about pilots. Today we are finally going to talk about drones and microchips. This is probably conceived to be the most complex topic of war robots, but since it is a basics video I will only cover fundamentals here. Drones and microchips seem quite difficult at first glance, but actually they are like pilots, but look a bit more complicated. So if you understand how pilots work, you won't have huge issues to understand drones and microchips. For simplicity, just imagine that a legendary pilot is a drone. The special kill of the legendary pilot is basically the special skill of the drone, and microchips are basically like pilot skills, but instead of two types of pilot skills, the ones for weapons and for robots, a microchip can be one out of 6 types, so this makes it maybe a bit confusing. But if you have understood this, you have basically understood the whole concept of drones and microchips. Like pilot skills, also microchips exist in tier 1, which is grey, up to tier 4, which is gold. Also drones themselves follow tiers. Like legendary pilots, all of them except the starter drone have one special ability that already comes with the drone, and the higher the tier of the drone, the more microchips it can fit, up to 5 slots in addition to the special one. Important difference: drones do not have levels themselves and can therefore not be upgraded. This means each drone of one type is exactly the same and fits the same types of microchips from the start, and that's great. It was not always like this. In the past, drones had different chip slots that were randomized, which made the concept even worse. So drones are always the same and they always fit the same number and types of microchips. Microchips, however, can be upgraded. Each of them has 4 levels or tiers. Tier 1 is grey, tier 2 is blue, tier 3 is purple, and tier 4 is gold. The process of upgrading looks quite complex, but in fact it's quite simple. It's just that Pixonic managed to create a horrible user interface. You basically always need a certain number of lower quality chips in order to get a chip of higher quality. And you also need to pay for the conversion by gold, or by watching an ad, but this only works for tier 1 to tier 2 conversions, and if you're not on the Steam platform. If all of the lower quality chips are of the exact same skill, you get the chip with the same skill but of higher quality. But if only one of them carries a different skill, you get a kind of randomized skill of that type. It's important to understand that, because it's one of the main reasons why high quality microchips of the best microchip skills are really hard to get. Except, you guessed it, if you spend some coin. So that's the general principle how it works. Now let's speak about the available types of drones and microchips a bit. Since drones were introduced, a lot of different types of drones came into the game. And especially for newer players, it's not easy to understand which drone is good for what. While good news or bad news, depending on how you see it, in the beginning you can't afford good drones anyways. It's probably the one type of equipment that is least relevant in lower leagues, but it will become a game changer when you come into higher leagues, because then drones and microchips will begin to cross-correlate with other gear, and this makes all the difference if you want your gear to be effective on a battlefield. So at the start you basically need to take what you can afford, and these are tier 1 or tier 2 drones that have limited abilities and chip slots. Through daily tasks you also get microchips, so for the start it's absolutely fine if you just use these. They will all give you a couple of basic benefits for each of your robots, for example healing or shields, so just take advantage of it because it's better to have them than not to have them. Here now an important clarification. Pixonic introduced drones as a variable feature that you can use depending on the situation on the battlefield. So the claim was that if you need firepower at one point in your battle, you pick an attack drone. If you need shields, you take a shield drone, and so on. So this approach, or this idea how Pixonic tries to sell drones, is plain wrong. In 99% of the cases you do not pick a drone because you need some particular support of a little helper on the battlefield in this moment, but instead the way how to use drones is rather that you optimize them for one of your robots in your hangar. So in this sense they become some sort of a second pilot. But luckily you do not need to bind them to your build, but you can transfer and exchange them at a later point to another build when you advance with your hangar. So when you place drones in your drone hangar, I would strongly suggest to place them in the exact order as the robots that you use them on. So the drone on the very left goes with your robot in your hangar on the very left, and so on. 2 exceptions. The first exception is if you run multiple hangars. In this case you need to sort of memorize which drones you want to run on which exact build in each hangar, except if you adapt the hangar positions of your robots according to your drone hangar. The second exception is FFA. Many top players bring the same robot that is optimized for FFA multiple times in the same battle. So often, all their drones are just for this one build. Also, the two spare drones that you can use are mostly used in FFA for this exact reason, but are usually not needed for all other regular game modes. I won't go into each drone that is currently out in the game, but the concept for drones is actually the same as for all other gear too. Drones and microchips should emphasize the strength of a particular robot. So in this sense, there are attack drones, healer drones, tank drones and so on. And this depends on the types of microchips that they allow to fit. Apart from the inherent drone ability, there are 6 types of microchips. The first one is the so-called ARMS controller socket, and, sorry to say that, it's typically quite useless in higher leagues. It allows to fit different drone weapons, miniguns, cannons and rockets, but their DPS is quite low, they barely scratch their targets. Then there are A-type microchips that allow to equip different effects. These can be really useful, especially for support bots. They allow to add freeze effects, lockdown, suppression effects in various accumulation speeds, or also slow down accumulation of such an effect on your own robot. Also here there is a quite useless one that, what a surprise, is also the most common chip, which is the acid sprayer. Just don't use it. The B-type microchips are attack chips, so these are commonly most useful on your heavy damage dealers. They typically add damage to your weapons when certain conditions are met, and are the most important chips for optimized cross correlations with other gear. One of the most common ones that is used these days is the so-called on-repair unit damage chip. These are basically triggers for additional damage whenever you activate your repair unit active module. It's a really effective way to boost your damage, even if it basically costs power cells. Another B-type microchip that is in wide use among top players is the so-called on-damage dealt damage microchip. This is an extremely powerful chip that increases damage dramatically if you have just dealt lots of damage already. So with the right setup, this can kill tanks and whole titans in a single salvo, as it basically boosts any other amplification as well. What I told you in the last few minutes were just a few examples for very effective cross correlations. And now you may get an idea why effective drone optimization in higher leagues is so powerful. If you do it right, you can add, for example, a huge percentage number to your base damage under certain conditions. Pair this with information sharing among top clans and maybe some bugs or exploits, and you will understand why top players have such a high amount of average damage and can kill you so quickly on the battlefield. They have simply optimized their builds. C-type microchips are defense microchips, and they have an important role for starting bots and also for tanks, because they add resistance to a robot when certain conditions are met. So in difficult situations, they may make the robot nearly indestructible for a few seconds. D-type microchips are repair microchips. These are one of the most useful chips for tanks because they restore health when certain conditions are met, for example when durability reaches a certain level or when you receive a certain amount of damage. Finally, a 6-type and as newest addition to the game, we have the F-type microchips. These are the ones that add shields to your robots. And these are also the reason why higher leagues are full of pink absorber shields, which in my opinion is destroying the game at the moment. Because everybody and their mom uses a particular insanely powerful microchip which is called on mild damage absorber. Whenever a robot receives a quite small amount of damage within 5 seconds, a pink indestructible shield pops up. It's extremely annoying because paired with lag and the short cooldown of this chip, you basically don't know when you should shoot an opponent. But luckily, Big Sonic announced quite recently that they are finally planning to take action against the pink shield pandemic. So at the time when you watch this video, hopefully the situation will have improved a bit, because it has impacted the game for a very long time in a non-positive way. You basically cannot run any robot without this particular chip anymore, otherwise you're simply not competitive against all other players that do run it. So can you sell drones and microchips? You can sell drones, but the amount of silver that you get for them is ridiculous. I wouldn't do it. You can't sell microchips yet, but at one point Big Sonic may introduce a feature that allows you to sell them, who knows. In the last months I got one particular question quite often in some variations. I sometimes run into Capris that take me out in only a few shots. Are they cheating? How is this possible? Well, my guess is that these players are not cheating, but they have simply understood how cross correlations and gear optimization works. I already gave you some examples before, but there is also another example that specifically applies for the Capri and the Revenant. Because these two robots take great advantage of very particular B-type microchips when their abilities are active. Because when they run a certain gear, in case of the Capri if you run the Misaki Ponchi pilot, they become immune to effects. And there are B-type microchips that add damage when effect immunity is active. For example, the on lockdown immune damage microchip. So paired with other powerful gear, this is the exact reason why you sometimes die so quickly. It's simply an additional layer of damage amplification that adds up to the ones that are already active. For example, a fully stacked nuclear amplifier. So it's not unusual that your hyper tanky Fenrir then dies in a few shots, and that you have problems to explain this to yourself. So this concludes the 6th and final part of Fundamentals of Hangar development. If you have watched all 6 episodes, which takes you about an hour, you should have gotten a quite good idea on how things work in War Robots and how you can build a decent hangar in a systematic and practical way, regardless if you spend or not or which game mode you prefer. I tried to make this series useful for everybody. But if you're a new player, you should ask yourself maybe a more fundamental question first. Do you actually want to play this game? Because War Robots unfortunately has a lot of issues at the moment. And although they are certainly recognized among the player base, they are not necessarily addressed adequately by Pixonic. And this takes a huge chunk out of the fun for most of us. I'm just being honest here. There are technical issues, for example the lag and lots of bugs. There is the buff nerf cycle and the continuous introduction of new pay-to-win elements into the game that basically nobody of the player base ever asked for. There is the issue that players' feedback is hardly taken into account and too often simply ignored. And there is also a huge issue with hackers, tankers and cheaters in the game. So these are just facts that simply cannot be ignored. So if you decide to play War Robots, you somehow have to find your own definition of fun in this game. This can be a great clan and squad gameplay, or exotic builds, personal challenges, or, as it is in my case, a YouTube channel. And also, who knows how long War Robots will still exist, because it has been out for quite some time now. Actually, it has been out there for an eternity when you compare it to other mobile games, so you may be better off investing your time and your money in another game that still has its brightest days ahead. So with these final thoughts, I wish you the best of luck through your War Robots journey and hope that I could contribute a small part that you understand a bit better what you're getting yourself into. Thanks for listening in and see you on my channel.